Hello, everyone. My name is Padmini Nidumolu, and I'm the co-founder of Lean and Agile for Women. This video is a part of Lean and Agile 100. It's also called LIA100. It's an initiative to celebrate the journeys of 100 most inspiring, influential women thought leaders in Lean and Agile spaces. Today, I'm really excited to introduce our thought leader for the day. She wrote the award-winning book called Lean Software Development and Agile Toolkit in 2003, which most of you probably are aware and are familiar with. And this book is to explain how the lean principles from manufacturing offer a better approach to software development. And she sure did not stop there with that book, but she wrote her second book in 2006, and it's called Implementing Lean Software Development from Concept to Cash. And then she went on to the third book in 2009 called Leading Lean Software Development, Results Are Not the Point. And she went on to yet another book, her fourth book in 2013 called The Lean Mindset, Ask the Right Questions. And over the past several years, she was hoping to retire, but it remained a distant dream for her since she lectures and teaches classes with her husband, Tom. Please join me in welcoming the author, speaker, and a great thought leader, Mary Poppendieck. Hi, Mary. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
Welcome to LIA100, and thank you so much for joining LIA100 list.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. All right. My first question to you, Mary, and I think I covered, a little bit about you in the introduction. None of that really justifies what you've done in your journey, but you've been on a phenomenal journey of learning and sharing. Can you think of a profounding learning or a profounding observation that stands out in terms of people and organizations? There's probably many, but can you think of a time or a scenario or a situation which stands out in your journey?
That's tough. I have never been in the same job for a very long, few years, several years, or perhaps I've always been in the job for a very long time. But I've always been opportunistic about what's the next interesting thing that I can do. Yeah. And I don't think I can remember any specific thing, but every time that I moved from one spot to the next was a big step. It was usually scary, it was usually risky, and it was an interesting opportunity. I had no idea if I would succeed, but what the heck? And I did it. And I made several of those steps. And writing my first book was a massive step, but there were many before that too.
Okay. And since you said that, writing your first book was a massive step. And I'm pretty sure in our community, there are several women who are wanting to take that first step. Some probably to become authors and some to do something else, but there's always that first step and the first time. And there's a lot of self-dialogue, there's apprehension, there is self-doubt, confidence gap when it comes to taking that first huge step. Mm-hmm. Can you share what it was like for you when you first attempted to write that first book? And if you can share some challenges and how you overcame those challenges.
Okay. So I'd always thought I would like to write a book. When I told my daughter I was writing a book, she says, well, you've always said you were going to. I like to write, but a book is way different than any kind of short essay or anything like that. Yeah. I remember when I first thought about it, I talked to Martin Fowler, and I asked him, how does one go about it? And he said, well, you start by writing some articles for magazines. So I did, and I got them published. And then a couple of folks that were authors and invited me to write a book for their series. And I didn't really have an idea what it meant, but I signed up a contract. And we had to say when it would be done. That's interesting, never having written a book. And I just had a general topic, and I did it, but it took 4, 5, 6, 7 months. I don't know. Sent it out for review, and it did not do very well. It was actually not such a good deal, such a good book. And I got a lot of critique back, and I pretty much tossed the whole version out. I remember Tom and I sat in our living room with a big whiteboard, and we sketched now rewriting, what are the points we want to make, how the chapter's going to go. Okay, so I'd already written a whole book, but it wasn't very good. And I did an outline, and then that book took another 4, 5, 6 months to write, and sent that one out for review. And I remember when Jim Highsmith got back to me, it was just before Christmas in 2002, and he said, "This is it. You've done it.
Wow.
This is good." And I thought, whoo! However, the process had a lot to do with Tom reviewing all of the time when I was writing and being critical of it and that sort of thing. He was co-author. I did most of the writing, and he did an amazing job of moving ideas around and funneling it in. And I remember the reviewing that we did in the end was a lot about getting rid of repetition and reading front to back and making sure it flowed, didn't have repetition, was a book, not a bunch of articles. It was a challenge, but it turned out pretty well.
Awesome. And what was your thought process like when your first version was critiqued and you had to toss it? What was your thought process like? And
they were right.
How did you overcome?
They were right. It wasn't very good. I mean, I like to read, and I wanted something that I liked to read, and it was too choppy, too radical, it wasn't aimed at it wasn't aimed properly at an intended audience. They were right. So I said, well, I can do better than that.
So you took it in the right spirit.
Well,
and you
apparently.
just watched ahead, right? That's how you ended up writing 4 books.
Criticisms of reviews of books are very useful. They give you really good ideas. I can say that, especially for my first book, the reviewers there were extraordinarily useful in helping figure out what constituted a good book.
Awesome. And what would your advice be, if I may ask, to everyone who is very apprehensive to take that first step for the fear of critique, for the fear of failure?
Well, do you mean writing or just in general?
In any first step.
Well, this concept of fear of failure is interesting because failure is only in your eyes. Most of the rest of the world doesn't care. Really, they don't care how you do, whether or not you succeed or fail. There's a very few people who pay a whole lot of attention to you and care whether or not how you are. So if I just ignore the rest of the world, the only one who really cares about failure is me and maybe some of my immediate family members, and it's mostly me. So that's a mindset. That's not failure. That's the way you look at yourself. And if you don't look at yourself as I failed, you look at yourself as I've learned, I can do better, then that's okay. So fear of failing, remember, who cares? Only you, really. So it's your definition of success or fail that determines whether or not you go on.
That's really appropriate.
Failure is in your head.
Failure is in the head, yeah. No, that's very true. Thank you for sharing that. I was just going through some of your works, Mary, and you mentioned in one of your, in fact, it was in leanessays.com, the collection of essays that you put together and update very often. And one of those works, you mentioned digitization must be an organization-wide experience, not just localized to IT or a particular department. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate what that means?
Well, historically, the IT department has been the place where the technologists are put because the leaders of the organization don't understand technology. And historically, IT has been the place where processes are automated, order processing, you know, that sort of stuff. But recently, as the whole world has become digitized, the digitization of the world has meant that doing very interesting stuff with digital technology has become a strategic part of the company. And if it just sits over there in IT, then the whole rest of the company isn't even thinking about how do we leverage the digital assets out there? How do we compete in the digital world? So I really think that the whole concept of using digitization as a strategic competitive advantage is something that can't go to a cost center. I mean, you can't, because cost centers are not supposed to make profit. They're supposed to, you know, be quiet in the corner. Whereas if you have the line organization, their job is to create delighted customers and enough money to continue on in the business. And today, a large amount of that, creating delighted customers and earning enough money to compete, has to do with using digital strategies. And somebody that's not even engaged in the line organization, not even part of it, doesn't have a lot of say in the kinds of strategic decisions that are made. So if a company is going to be digital and use digital stuff in order to compete, then they have to do it as an organization effort, and especially it has to be understood and probably led from the line business.
Yeah, and we see, you know, just the digitization being local to IT is very common, and not having an organizational-wide experience or having the business agility marching towards the same North Star is not very common. So what you said makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
But it changes as the competitors in an industry become more digitized. So think about banks. You know, when I first ran into a bank that put up a website, it took them 18 months and they were so proud of it because they finally managed to put up a website for the bank where you could check your balances. Okay, well, banks can't get away with that anymore. Having a digital strategy is fundamental to any bank dealing with consumers. Yeah. And when the very first websites were put up, you know, the IT people were astounded that once the project was done, you still had to keep maintaining it. You still had to keep making changes and improvements and submitting again to the phone websites where your app was. And that was just a novel concept. Our project's supposed to be done when they're done. And then they kind of spun off the people that were doing this new age stuff into a separate group and kind of gave them some new rules, but the separate group couldn't get at the base underlying systems that they needed to make some changes in strategy. And over time, you can see that banks, especially commercial banks, have discovered that they have to compete by having a digital strategy, because otherwise they just are not living in today's world as far as banking is concerned. Yeah. So as an industry becomes more and more digitized, that might start slow, but eventually the whole concept of how do we think about the digital world has to move into the line organization and become a strategic direction that the company takes. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to compete against the other people that do.
Yeah, they cannot stay relevant. Yep. Very well said. And, you know, I was just pondering on another perspective that you shared in one of, you know, the works again on your website here. And it's about the lean mindset. And it's also about energizing workers. And it really caught my attention because in that you mentioned something in the lines of the time and energy of bright and creative people are the scarce resources in today's economy. Mm-hmm. And that's a very profound statement. I wanted to ask you, do you believe this should also include diverse resources, bringing in diverse perspectives to the table and to any decision making? And I'm particularly referring here to gender balance.
Okay. So yes, of course, because if you're going to address a diverse market, you have to have different people thinking about how to do it. If you think you can have a very small, narrow group of people with one mindset addressing whole bunch of people with different cultural backgrounds and different gender experiences, it's not going to work.
Right.
Your competitors will do better than you. But I do have to say that when I was first in software, it was a women's field. Easily 40% or more of my colleagues when I first started in software were women. My sister, a year older than me, my sister, a year younger than me, and I, all three of us became programmers. It kind of was the thing to do. And then it's drifted off over into the 80s where it became more of a male-dominated world. But right now, we're moving into an era where digitization of companies means I have a strategic approach to customers, which uses digital things, digital tools. And when you start approaching customers, if you don't have a set of workers that has the same background as your customers, you're really at a disadvantage compared to companies that know how to work with all different kinds of people with different kinds of backgrounds and different kinds of experiences. So the concept that a diverse group of people is better able to handle a diverse market is important, but it's also important that companies do more than just have a diverse workforce. They also have to have a way to make sure that those people are all expected and able to use their thinking and their thought process and speak their mind, rather than getting involved in groupthink where whoever the first speaker speaks is right. And there's a lot of research showing that you have to work hard in any group to make sure that everybody has a voice. So even if you happen to have a diverse workforce, but the people who are normally quiet, don't speak the language as their native language, have a different cultural background, which tends to minimize the way the likelihood of speaking up and to favor being quiet. If those people don't have the opportunity to put in their ideas because of those, the group is not drawing them out and listening to them and giving them a voice, the diversity isn't going to make much difference.
Yeah. And you know, you really brought up a great point. Even if you have a diverse group of people working together, yes, there are diverse perspectives, but you know, it's very hard to kind of have every voice, you know, being heard and considered, and you know, the outcome is, you know, so much more powerful and productive. So there's a lot of work goes into it.
Interestingly enough, in agile environment, there are voting techniques that have been developed which favor the majority opinion of any team. Well, what happens to the few in the minority who happen to think differently? Their opinions don't get heard. Their ideas don't get pursued. There's got to be more than just flat out voting and going with the majority. If you have a diverse workforce, you have to do more than that. You have to think hard about how to listen to everybody, not take a vote and go with the majority.
I agree. And speaking of which, another great essay that you have put together was about Friction Lab. I thought that was really interesting. And you mentioned some of the you know, concepts that you just explained. So in your experience, in your learning, you know, what kind of frictions, you know, really caught your attention, and what was done to kind of alleviate those?
Let's see. I can't figure out how far back to go.
It doesn't happen.
But one thing that caught my attention when I was really young, was that my mother told us, my mother had 11 children, so really big family. But when she was a kid, she wanted to be a nurse because her father was one of the original pioneer doctors in Wisconsin. He actually started the Wisconsin Medical Association. And so she wanted to be a doctor. And her father said, no, you can't be a doctor. You have to be a nurse. And well, she was darned if she was going to be a nurse. No way. If she could be a doctor, she wasn't going to have any of that medical stuff whatsoever. And so she actually became a math teacher. And, until she had a family. When she was in her late 20s, she got married, and then she had lots of kids. But that always impressed me. was never take second class as okay. And so when I was looking for a job, it was the same thing. I had a major in math, a master's in math, and I didn't have a master's in math right away, but I had a major in math, a minor in physics. And I didn't want to be a teacher because that's what all the women were expected to do. So how was I going to be a math? How was I going to use my math? I didn't want to be an actuary because that sounded really boring. So then there was this new field called computers, and it had the same logic needed as math. If you could think mathematically, you could easily think how the computer put algorithms together and did stuff.
Sure.
And so that was a new opportunity, and it was a new job, and it was something that nobody could tell me I couldn't do. And it's that don't follow the crowd, take the path less traveled. That whole mantra of don't go where everybody else is, find a different way to go. Something that's new and different and unusual and not common is something I've always tried to do. Don't do what's expected of you either, for sure.
I'll make a note of it because I love what you said. Yeah, absolutely. So you must have employed many, I would say, superpowers in your journey. But writing 4 books is no joke.
Right.
You know, all of us know what kind of tremendous energy and focus that requires. And you know, you speak, you travel, you teach. What kind of superpowers do you have, Mary, to kind of enable all this?
Well, I was always a good student and I always loved math. But when I got to working at 3M in the engineering department, they said all engineers have to be able to communicate. Otherwise, there's whole parts of their job they can't do. And I had a class in public speaking. And the whole concept there was if you can't write and you can't speak, then you are not going to be able to be successful in your engineering job because you have to be able to communicate. So I think the superpowers that I have are 3 of them. One is I love to speak in front of audiences, and apparently I'm good because the audience will love to hear me. I like writing a lot, and I enjoy it. I don't think if people don't like writing, they should try to write a book. You have to enjoy the process.
Right.
And the other thing is just plain old determination. If I start something, I finish it. Just because. It's said that people who have PhDs, and I have a husband and a son and a daughter-in-law, all 3 of whom have PhDs. And they prove that, and my husband's in physics, my son and daughter-in-law are in environmental engineering. So persistence is the major trait of anybody who gets a PhD. It's not really intelligence. It's completing what they started, because PhD and writing a book is pretty much the same thing. It's a very long process, and the determination to complete what you start and just finish it. That kind of determination is what you see in people with PhDs. And my son has often said that writing a book, I wrote my book as he was writing his PhD thesis, and they were about my first book. They were about the same amount of work.
I can definitely believe that. So persistence and determination, right? You know, and I think if you have those 2 superpowers, nothing is impossible. So, and I'm sure you had both of them pretty
impossible. Again, that's a frame of mind.
A frame of mind, yes, just like failure. And no, you're a great author, Mary, and I've known the books that you have written, and those books have been referenced by many people in several occasions. Which other books do you recommend or suggest? And, you know, who are the authors that you admire and look up to besides yourself?
I've got this big bookshelf down here.
I can't see it, but I can believe it.
Right.
You probably read quite a bit.
There's now tomorrow. Okay, so this is not easy. I think I'm not going to be able to tell you right off the top of my head.
That's fine.
Because it depends on which part of, the decade it is. There is a series of books, but I cannot right off the top of my head think of the author.
Which is totally okay. I mean, I was just trying to see if any book kind of stands out, or an author, who stands out, and, we can kind of go and, reference them. But if there is an inspiring personality who you kind of found to be an anchor or inspiration, who would that be?
Oh, it's my mother. Absolutely.
Okay.
I told you a little bit about her already.
Yeah.
And I always was heavily influenced, not just by her, but my memories of her. So she never, she had the saying, don't get mad, get even. And I can remember time and again when something would happen and she was not happy because she was shortchanged by some vendor or something like that. And she would not get mad. She would find a way to make it right. One time we had a whole bunch of curtains and they were returned from the dry cleaners wrinkled. And she spent a lot of money to get them all cleaned and ironed. So she didn't pay the bill. She put the curtains up, she didn't pay the bill. Took 6 months for the people to finally decide that they were going to come and iron them so she would pay them. And she says, don't get mad, get even.
Yeah, persistence again. Wow. And then my mother is my inspiration as well, so I can absolutely relate to what you just said. Yeah. And something that you just said, struck me with your speaking experiences, where, you took a public speaking class, and to being able to speak in front of a huge audience is your superpower. And that is not easy by any means. And many of us struggle to be able to do that. And I personally know many women who have great stories, especially in Lean and Agile spaces that we interact with, but they're very apprehensive to take the first step to submit to a conference as a speaker, or even just share their story with the audience. There is an apprehension. If there is one thing, or if there is something that they can kind of tell themselves to kind of slow that internal dialogue, what would that be to just do it?
Well, by the time I had left 3M, I had done a lot of speaking inside the company, in front of various medium-sized audiences for various reasons. I think you should speak in front of groups all the time, as often as you can, for any reason whatsoever, and just get used to it, because it doesn't matter what talent anybody has, whether they're a great pianist or have great talent on a musical instrument or athlete, doesn't matter. When they started, they weren't good. I guarantee you, when they started, they weren't good.
Oh, yeah.
You want to get good at anything, you got to do it. Yeah. And your first time, you're not going to be good. So live with it. So get yourself lots and lots of opportunities to talk in front of people. And it doesn't have to be big audience, because in the end, the size of the audience doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm in public, saying something in public, exposing my way of thinking and stuff to other people. And if you do it enough, you get used to it. You get used to what does work, what doesn't work, how to deal with audience feedback. And you're just not going to be good to begin with. So if you ever want to do it, you're going to have to, if you want to play the piano, you have to think around on it. If you want to be a runner, you start slow. You have to do the same with speaking or writing a book. Doesn't matter. Skills don't happen overnight. And if you think you're going to get up in front of an audience and be great the first time out, think again, that's not the way skills happen.
Absolutely.
So get used to the idea that you're not going to be so good. Practice. Do it a lot.
Practice. Okay. So start somewhere, practice.
Yes.
Do it a lot, and you'll get there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Anything you want to do, any skill you want to develop, that's the way it works.
It does, yes.
Choose to develop it and focus on having opportunities to get better and better and learning from mistakes and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Do it. It doesn't make any difference what skill it is, whether it's driving a car, or
Yeah.
any of those things require practice.
Yes.
Doesn't happen automatically. So it's not, and again, being afraid to be in front of the audience is mental. It's your problem. They don't care. But recognizing that when you first do it, you're going to not be as good as after a while. That's something that'll help you get over the first few times. So no, you're not going to be good the first time, but what the heck, don't ever start. You're never going to get there.
Yes. No, that's very valuable. Thank you so much, Mary. And as we are wrapping up here, is there something that you would like to share with our audience as, it could be a quote, it could be a message, it could be what you live by, just something for us?
I think the thing that I've been focusing on most recently, I don't really like the way software development is done. I was an engineer in an engineering department doing software. We were expected to understand the problem, solve the problem, work as a team. We did not have somebody between us and our customer. I would like to see engineering teams that are directly in contact with their customer without proxies in the middle, pretending that they're the ones that should be telling a team what to do. So I would say, look for places where the teams are actually expected to be given problems, to be given customer-focused metrics that they're supposed to achieve, and figure out for themselves as a team what to do, not have somebody telling them what to do, setting priorities, or any of that nonsense. Look for jobs where you can actually solve problems instead of do tasks.
Okay, without any layers of complication or proxies.
Yes,
okay.
No proxies.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. And thank you so much for your time and your willingness to share your wisdom, your experiences, and what you think.